Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Mr. Samuel Sapling, and in this video, we'll be looking at the analysis of limits. Alright, so before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Alright, so the only way you understand this part is by taking it as a human language. Most people get confused when it comes to analysis of limits because I would say it's confusing, but you understand it in the end. Now, let's understand it with an analogy. So suppose you have an analogy in the sense that you meet someone for the first time. If you meet someone for the first time and they introduce themselves to you as, say, Ben. Now, suppose I had to ask you a question to say, define Ben. Now you only know his name. If I ask you to define who Ben is, you won't really define him. And the reason is simple. You don't have enough information about this person. The only way you can define Ben is if you knew more about him. Even if I say define Ben if he was a number, define Ben if he was this or that, you wouldn't really define Ben. Even if Ben was equivalent to something, you wouldn't define him because you don't really have enough information about Ben. Now suppose Ben defines himself. Tells you, oh no, my name is Ben, I'm a successful businessman, I am good at my crafts, I can build houses, and I take good care of my family. Now, if Ben defines himself to you and I ask you to say, do you think Ben has limitations in his life? So you would say yes, based on what or based on the definition of Ben. Well, another could say no. So now, just because Ben defined himself to be a successful businessman who's good at his craft doesn't mean that he doesn't have a limit. And again, it also doesn't mean that just because Ben defined himself, it doesn't have a limit. Ben can be defined and also have limits. Again, Ben cannot be defined and Ben cannot have what? Limits. In another sense, I would say this. You can define Ben, but his limitations cannot exist. Again, Ben cannot be defined, but his limitations can exist. Because it entirely depends with the person who is visualizing Ben. So if you study more about Ben, that's when you can predict if he has limitations or not. With the analogy, let's begin. When it comes to the analysis of limits, there are two main points you have to know. A function cannot be defined, but the limit can exist. The second point is this. A function can be defined, but a limit cannot exist. The last point, I didn't write it down because this one is a no-brainer. A function can be defined and a limit can also what? Exist. Now, there is something I need you to understand. When it comes to functions, if you evaluate a function at a particular point, then you define it. That is, if that value is definite. Now, just because a function is defined at a point, it doesn't necessarily mean that the limit must always exist. Sometimes it doesn't. And even if the limit existed, it also doesn't mean that it will be equal to the value we'll obtain if we try to define any given function, say f of x, at its approach, c. Say, define f of x at x is equal to c. So, be mindful that it doesn't mean that it will be equal to the value we obtain if we try to define the function at x is equal to c. Now, sometimes the function isn't defined, but the limit exists. Don't forget. But one of the most important points you have to bear in mind are that you can't really conclude much about a function if you haven't been given enough information. If I only give you a function as f of x, or f, or let me just say limit as x approaches c, a function f of x, this is not enough. Not even f or f of x, this is not enough for you to conclude. Just because you know the name doesn't mean you know everything about this person. Same thing here. So you cannot conclude about a function if you don't have enough information. So you need enough information. You need a scenario maybe where you have the limit of x approaching 2 of a function such as x plus 1. You can say something about this type of situation because at least you have enough information about it. Now, how are questions brought and how are questions phrased? Let's look at some questions. Let's look at like 3 examples to easily understand this. So suppose that a function f of x is defined for all real values of x except x being equal to what? C. Can anything be said about the existence of the limit of the function f of x as x approaches c? Now, no. Nothing can be said about the function, and nothing can be said about this situation. Just because the limit as x approaches c is f of x, it doesn't necessarily mean that I can define it. It doesn't necessarily mean that I can say anything or conclude anything about the existence of the limit of this function. Because if I had to give my reason, because I'm saying give reason for your answer, I would say I don't really have enough information about this. So there isn't enough information. So I would say no enough information. I need enough information for me to conclude about a particular function. If I don't have enough information, I can't really conclude about a function. Let's look at question number 2. If the limit of f of x as x approaches 1 is equivalent to 5, is it a must that f be defined at x is equal to 1? If it is, must f at 1 equal to 5? And can we conclude anything about the value of f at x being equal to 1? Explain. Let me answer the first part. If the limit as x approaches 1 of f of x is 5, is it a must that it should be defined that x is equal to 1? It's not really a must. So no, it's not a must that f should be defined at x is equal to 1. But now, if it was a must, will f at 1 be equal to 5? Since it's a must, yes, it will be equal to what? 5. Can we conclude anything about the value of f at x being equal to 5? No, we can't conclude. And what's the reason? The reason is simple. The only reason why you cannot conclude anything about a limit is that you don't really have enough information. So no enough what? Information. No enough information. You need to have enough information to conclude about a function. Let's look at the last example. If f at 1 is equal to 5, must the limit as f of x as x approaches 1 exists? So just because f is defined at 1 to be 5, is it a must that the limit should exist? So in the first portion, no, it's not what? A must. It's not a must that the limit as x approaches 1 of the function f of x will exist. Okay? But here they're saying, if it was a must, should the limit as x approaches 1 of f of x be equal to 5? If it was a must, now since it's a must, one would have said yes, but in this case it's a no. Why? Because if you look at this scenario, the condition is that the limit of f of x as x approaches 1 be equivalent to 5. No. Even if it was a must, this function cannot be equivalent to what? 5, because if you look at the scenario and the condition of the question, it can't really always be equal to 5 because you don't even know what f of x is. So just because x is approaching 1 at a function called f of x doesn't necessarily mean that it should be 5, even if it's a must that the limit existed. So the limit could exist, but the function could not be equal to what? 5 at a particular what? Approach. So the answer is what? No. It's not a must that the limit as x approaches 1 of f of x be equal to what? 5. Now they're saying, can we conclude anything about the limit as x approaches 1 of the function f of x? On the conclusion part, no, we can't really conclude anything. Now, what's the reason? Now, the reason is the same. We do not have enough what? Information. We have little information about f of x. So, no enough information about the function what? F of x. So be mindful, when it comes to the analysis of limits, it's all about you understanding the type of situation you're being given, the type of statement that has been phrased to you. Remember the analogy I gave you in the first place, in the beginning of the video, that you met this person for the first time and you were asked these and those questions. So be mindful about that. So if you have questions, you can reach me on WhatsApp on the number attached to the screen, on the number in my description. My name is Mr. Hussein Mwasapi. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Remember to strategize before you become a statistic. And let's try and push for that.